What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show, everyone. I got Brandon Barlow on the show. I'm pumped because I love guys that go out there and put out some really cool, just educational pieces. Obviously, myself being a physical education teacher, so in that educational field, I think I do a pretty crappy job when it comes to that side of things, like the deer hunting side. I love, I guess, learning about it and implementing things and trying things. But then when it gets to like the gear side of things, that's the stuff I like teaching, just because, again, being a physical education teacher, I like that hands-on experience and like all that type of stuff. So Brandon, dude, it's a great pleasure to have you on and get a chance to talk whitetail with you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Dude, anytime, man. So let's do a quick rundown just so I get a chance to know you a little bit and the listeners do as well. You know, where are you coming from? What's your background a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Brandon Barlow. I have the page Whitetail 101 and also 690 Fishing. I have a fishing channel. Everybody pretty much knows me either locally as just Barlow, which is how they store me in their phone, or I've been known as Carolina Reaper or just Reaper for the past probably 15 years. Had that handle for a while. Yeah, pretty much live here in North Carolina, down here in the Southeast, and originally from up north, and moving to the South has resulted in me having to find some pretty unorthodox ways to hunt deer. So just kind of really shared my story for the past few seasons, and really just started my page to help people get on deer and be a little bit more successful. We get a lot of tags here in the South, so one thing that I really push is efficiency. So we fill a lot of tags pretty fast, and that appeals to some people.
Yeah, heck yeah, man, dude. So what's new, man? What do you got going on? Like, where are you at in the preparation for this upcoming season? I know down south you guys start a little bit earlier than us guys up here up north. So where are you at currently in your preparation?
Yeah, so I hunt both North Carolina and South Carolina. I live on near the line, so I have access to both. And I actually usually get a Virginia tag too. It's only an hour
Yep.
and a half. So South Carolina rifle season opens 8:15, like next week. Rifle season, and
Wild.
they get 5 buck tags. So that insanity is about to happen. Also, it's like triple digit weather, like actually today we're being hit by Hurricane Debbie's literally like outside right now. Shit's like like blowing around. So I may even lose my Wi-Fi. I apologize if that happens, but
Yeah, all good, man.
yeah, so those guys start putting the hammer down on deer pretty hard. It's a little too hot for me. Generally, I won't hunt if it's over 90. So it usually takes the first big storm in September. I'll hunt on the backside of that first storm. Last year it was on 9/25 was the first day I hunted. The year before was 9/17. So it just depends kind of, but I'll
Mhm.
wait for that first real shitty storm to come through, and it'll take the 90 to 100 highs during the day and that 75, 80 at night, and it'll knock it down to like 60 at night.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't really mind walking into your stand. Or if you do, I'm pretty unorthodox the way I hunt. So I do all day September sits. I know that sounds crazy, but um, you don't want it to be 100 degrees when you're in a tree. Like it's
Yeah.
horrible. So if your high that day is 82, you can strip down to a t-shirt while your thermals are rising and take a nap or whatever. But yeah, you don't want it to be 100. So so I wait, but that insanity is about to start. North Carolina is a little bit later. I think our season comes in 9/12 this year, so that will be more in line with what I'm trying to do.
Hmm.
And as far as how I'm prepared, yeah, I'm pretty much always prepared. There's a lot of variables. So it's August now. So I say one of my things I say is don't be the pressure in August. So right now is the time I'm tinkering. I'm putting on peep sights and I'm shooting broadheads and losing arrows in the woods. And, I'm trying to eat up the last of our venison. We're eating some chili and stuff. So it's that time of year to be doing that sort of stuff and not not jacking up my bedding areas, because that August, changes in the air. So that August, September shift is going to be happening, and it's not really a good time to be just pounding on your does. So trying to let those bedding areas, those primary bedding areas, calm down, stay out of there. And as far as how I'm ready, I'm pretty much ready. The cameras that I'll be hunting next year have been hung for a couple of seasons. The places that I'm pretty much hunting this year, two of the places I don't have cameras. The other two places I still do. So I'll be hunting, but those cameras have been there for a long time, and
Right.
I'm hunting some bucks that have been coming around for a few years. So looking forward to that. But I have all of my hunts planned. I know where I'm hunting pretty much each week, which scrape I'm at based on, um, and previous historical data with respect to day walking mature bucks. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm tracking is day walking mature bucks. So that's where my hunts are planned out. I have a couple of, 6 or 7 bucks I'm expecting this year at certain time frames. um, and for example, I know where I'll be the last 10 days of September. I'll be hunting two specific spots on two specific animals. So,
Right.
also another unorthodox thing I do is I generally hunt specific animals. So I know that's kind of weird to people too, but
Hey man, if you're
yeah.
capable of it, right? Do you know what I mean? Like that's
I
the
mean, you have no choice down here, man. We don't like every town doesn't have a 150. So when there is a big buck and it does bet on private, we can get out and door knock. But if there's a big buck and it's betting on public, all bets are off. And there's a lot of people hunting that deer, and so
yeah.
um, it's not like in a good state you just need to hunt a good spot,
Hmm.
and this isn't a good state. So I'll give you an example. I was just talking to one of my buddies, Tyler. He's a Wisconsin, Minnesota boy, and I pick on him because he has like Boone and Crockett deer like drinking out of his bird bath, right? Like, because he lives out there. And so he's like, oh, Minnesota, Indiana sneaking up on us. They had 22 Boone and Crockett entries last year. And I'm like, so I Google, like, I look up North Carolina because I'm like, all right, let me see how many North Carolina has. And we've had, in the whole history of Boone and Crockett, we've had 35. Like, not last year, like total.
Ever.
So
Yeah.
I try to tell people, it's like you got to set your expectations, because yes, I could be the 36th guy, but hey, it's probably not going to be me.
Yeah. Well, dude, you brought up a great point because that was one aspect I wanted to see if it would fit into our conversation, and it seems
Yeah.
like it will, is that expectations thing. Because I mean, dude, I mean, we sit here before the season. I mean, like you said, obviously you're probably not going to be going out here in the next couple weeks with the rifle season just because of how hot it is and you wait for that storm. But like when you look at your expectations going into the year, I mean, for most people, they do change year to year, right? So for you, man, like what is your how do you reel yourself in with like how you said, this is where I'm going to be hunting. What maps out for your expectations going into each season? Like, is it like you said, hey man, I got a good deer. I plan on hunting him. My expectation is to try to go after him at these points and time and all that stuff. So like your expectations to reality, what does that look like, I guess, for you?
Yeah. So you got to look at it from 30,000 feet, because you can't look at it up close or you'll be really heartbroken a lot. And that's really how you have to look at deer data too. You don't want to really focus on where a buck was this hour, that hour, this morning or yesterday. It's where does he spend September, and where does he like to drop his antlers, and and where does he spend large amounts of time? And it's kind of the same. So my expectations this year, I don't really express my expectations too much. But my expectations on myself is to have an average year. I always have an average year.
Okay.
Last 3 seasons on Instagram pretty much portrayed that it's just an average hunting area. We're not in a good area where, like I said, you can hunt a good spot in a good area, knock down a good deer pretty much always. Here it requires a little bit of work. But with that being said, I do keep a stiff goal for myself. And my expectations are legitimate, meaning like I'll accomplish them. Usually every year I have an average season. So this year I expect I will kill two or three good bucks. Good bucks, as in Carolina good bucks. They'll be between 115 inches and 170 inches. I'll kill two or three of those usually, and then I'll probably shoot eight or nine does. Um, However, there's a few new angles there because I started picking up secondary weapons recently, and so I shot a pistol doe 2 years ago with a pistol. So last year I said I was going to shoot a 3-year-old, and I did that. So this year I technically have to kill a mature buck with my pistol. That's going to be pretty hard. So hopefully one of my, two or three bucks I can get it done with the pistol. And then last year I actually picked up the recurve for the first time, and I shot two does. I got a trad bow double with two does. And so I guess technically this year I'm supposed to shoot a 3-year-old with my trad bow, which, that's probably going to be even harder than the mature buck with a pistol. So, because by three, there a 3-year-old buck is intellectually about the same as an old doe, right? So they're not like, they don't have that super crazy like a mature buck, but at three, like with a recurve, that's a pretty tall order. So I'm looking forward to those two things. So likely one of my bucks this year will just be like 3-year-old. I passed 12 3-year-olds last year, so I should have some decent talent. But with that being said, I'm not really the kind of guy that has a lot of big velvet pictures. Most of my deer don't start trickling in until mid-August. So I won't really have those deer pictures for a little while. But expectations versus reality. My expectations are to have an average season. The reality, my goal will be to keep on that. I have set hunts at set locations. I will hunt probably 10 specific bucks in 10 spots 10 times. I don't do a lot of sits. Out of those 10 hunts, I'll kill probably one or two of them. I'm not that good of a hunter, I guess. It takes me, I ruin a lot of hunts. So I'll kill one or two of those. And then I'll go on to November where I just start shooting does. That's pretty much will be my season. I don't really try to set crazy goals. I'm not trying to
Right.
kill a public land booner in a state where there's only ever been 35 times it's done. That's not what I consider a realistic goal. A goal isn't a wish list.
Okay.
Your goals are a to-do list.
Hmm.
And if I'm sitting there saying I'm going to kill a public land booner in North Carolina, I'm going to be the 36th guy in 150 years to do like that's not a realistic goal. But for me in a state that's really hard to hunt, I think a Pope and Young animal or two is a realistic goal. I try to stick to that. I have had fun picking up the secondary weapons. I do highly recommend that. I mean, if you're in a really tough area to hunt, maybe you can't get it done on a mature buck, then dude, shoot that 2 or 3-year-old with a pistol. Like, man, it was so fun. Like, you
Yeah.
can make it so, it's like, oh, that's not much of a sport to shoot a spike horn. Well, yeah, we'll shoot one with a recurve. That's a
Right.
pretty much of a sport now, like
Yep. Exactly.
a spike horn is an idiot until you have to smell his breath. And then he's pretty wily because that's pretty much how close you have to get with a recurve. You've got to see the whites of his eyes, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
so it's still
Exactly.
hard. I mean, so I'd say like just, do what you can for your area. And if you have big deer to hunt, that's awesome. But I think for most people, that's not a realistic goal to kill a big deer.
Right.
Um, it's just like I think when you get to a certain age, you get set in a niche where like I'm always gonna go to this farm and I'm always gonna kill a nice 8-point there because that's all they grow is 8-points, and you just know. And it's like, oh, well, he had a broken tie and he was a 7, but he should have been an 8. Like you just know what you're gonna do. You're over.
Yep.
Well, that farm, like I have a farm where I literally shot, or it's like a 80-acre out by the Uhari, a place that I hunt, and it's two door knock pieces that form like an L, and it's across the highway from the Uhari, and out there I've killed 3 10-pointers that are almost. Swear to God, they're like mirror images of each other. So, like, I think when you reach an age, you get these spots where it's like, I'm going to kill a big 7 in that drainage. You just know it. But other than that, I think you just have to work to find those spots. And, if you were to ask my advice, like the number one thing would be to just focus on hunting daytime deer. If you want to shoot a doe, then you need to find where a doe is in the daytime. If you want to shoot a 2-year-old, you need to find a 2-year-old in the daytime. And so you need to find a daytime mature buck if that's what you're trying to. That makes the goal more realistic. When you have a day walker, you're now in the game. That
Right.
becomes a realistic goal. You're not just walking out in the woods and sitting on a log and you're trying to dream up a buck. You're like, well, if I think about it hard enough, one will just walk right in. Like,
It doesn't work
no,
like
you have a day
that.
walking animal. Okay, that's now a goal. But
Yep.
it's not a real goal if you don't. And I think you have to be honest with yourself. And, that gets into building scrapes and stuff and building them in frivolous locations and not focusing on daytime deer, which is really what I push the most.
Right. Well, we will get into that, but
Yeah.
before we do, Brandon, I want to backtrack because you said something that I can relate to, and that is where you're not seeing velvet really until middle late August.
Yeah.
And I have that same just because of my property layout that where I normally hunt. So talk to me about that because it took me a little bit years ago to kind of come to peace with that basically, right? Like I'm seeing all these velvet pictures and I'm like, man, like where do these deer go and all that stuff? And at this point now, I don't really care where they are right now. You know what I mean? Because I do know year after year, come middle, late August, they'll be on our cameras. So
Mhm.
with that being said, what do you do into preparation for that? Like once you see them coming, like what is your process for then doing that whole finding them in the day, like being
So I guess for people listening who don't know me, like I'm literally a nobody, I swear. Like I don't kill 200s. I barely kill a big buck every year. Like, and usually I have 10 or 15 big bucks and I still only kill one or two. So, for I guess what I bring to the table is that I've been running a lot of cameras for a really long time and I've been gathering certain types of data for a really long time and logging it. And so that has led me to hunt certain ways, and it has led me to deduce like what I believe to be certain opinions. Maybe I won't call them facts about deer, but it has allowed me to really finite my game to where I do fill a lot of tags pretty quickly. Last year I shot 9 deer in a dozen sits, and the year before I killed 7 deer in 11 sits. And so I don't say that to brag. Anybody who knows me knows I'm very humble, but the reason I say that is because it can be done. You can be really efficient if you're hunting daytime daytime deer, and it's really impossible to know all of the deer you're hunting without cameras, but you can still hunt daytime deer without cameras, and there's definitely some ways to do that. But the reason I wanted to preface with that is because I don't want people thinking like anything I say is going to put them on a 200. But what I'll do is I'll get you into some primary bedding areas, and from there you can do everything else yourself. I mean, as long as you don't go in there and booger up the spot with your scent or doing something crazy, pressuring the deer, everything from there will happen. So for me, you were talking about those 8:15 August velvet pictures. So for me, that's by design. I can tell you why the deer are coming to the areas that I hunt, and I can tell you why I key in on those spots, and I can tell you what the deer are doing while they're there, and where they're bedding, and what they're eating. I could tell you very, very little about what they're doing in the summer and why. I've never gathered that data. I actually don't. So for me, I guess right out of the gates. Um, if you had a lot of cameras, let me digress for 1 second. If you had a lot of cameras and you could do anything you wanted with them, how would you use them? I always ask guys, if I gave you 100 cameras right now, boom, gift, how
yep,
would you use them? What would you use them for? And incidentally, those 100 cameras came with like 10 tags. What would you use them for? Well, the best thing to use them for would be to focus on day walking mature animals. Um, And with that, day walking mature animals that show up at the same spot more than once. So generally, I'm hunting an animal the third year. So I don't want to digress on that too far, but my point is, if you're hunting, day walking, mature animals with those cameras, you will have a plentiful group of animals to hunt. I mean, I have a lot of bucks from year over just from these primary bedding areas. I know this buck tends to come through in November, this one comes through in October. And for me, I hunt those scrapes at those times. So that's how I focus in on historical data. I'm usually hunting specific deer at specific times at specific locations. But for me, the reason why I'm not seeing those bucks right now is by design. So I'm going into a woodlot and I'm finding a primary bedding area, and there's ways to do that without cameras. The obvious way is with cameras, right? Like, you want daytime deer pictures, period, not midnight, so you want 80% or more of your pictures to be in the daytime. That's going to right there immediately increase your odds of filling a tag. Immediately. Overnight, one thing, if the only thing you do is hunt a spot where you had 80% daytime pictures on that camera, you just dramatically increase your chances of at least filling a doe tag. You're on deer now. I mean, like real deer in the daytime, you're on them now. So from there, if you can layer in historical buck sightings, um, uh, then you can start to figure out when to hunt a specific spot. So if you're in Wisconsin and you don't have to worry about really historical data, or maybe you're really up north where the rut is in a finite window, you can just kind of hunt a good spot at a good during the rut, or hunt a good spot in a good state. But if you're in like Georgia or Alabama or here in the Carolinas, and your rut is all over the place, you have to know when to hunt certain thickets. And so part of what I do is I run my scrape cameras year round to capture secondary data like fawning and other stuff, but it's really important to focus on primary bedding areas where deer live in the daytime, and you can use other sign like, for example, you're going to see a lot of browse damage. Um, and if you're not finding that browse damage, it's not bedding area. So there's ways to find those primary bedding areas with and without cameras, and then from there, uh, you want to focus on security cover, and once you get into that security cover near that primary bedding area, um, your primary bedding area will be security cover and moderate cover, and security cover and moderate cover. And in that security cover areas, what I key in on is historical breeding signs. So rubs, scrapes, and then historical buck sightings. So I'll find I have a few I have a couple cameras on on a signpost rub, things like that. So I'll start gathering that historical breeding data for that area. It'll be daytime historical breeding data. So if you're in a primary bedding area and now you're finding rubs, you're increasing the chances that those rubs were made during the daytime,
Right.
and that's a deer that you can kill. So those are probably the two biggest things I'm keying in on. I'm finding that primary bedding area, and then from there I'm finding the historical breeding data, or the historical breeding sign rather, the rubs and the scrapes and all that. And then I'm going to hone in and find out when. So you got the where. I know where. I'm in the thicket. I found the rubs. Man, it's thick. It's going to be good. I can take my boot off and throw it and not find it. This is the spot.
Right.
Well, when? In the Adirondacks or Maine, that's November. Like, the when. And that's what I mean by, if you're in a good state like the mountains of PA or New York, you can just
Right.
hunt a good spot during the rut. But down here, let's say Alabama, you don't know if that thicket is hot in September or October or November or January. We have standing estrus in February. We have a really wide rut in the South. So it's imperative that you add when to like your where game, because it doesn't do you any good to hunt a good spot if all your does are pregnant. I mean, so that's where the fawning data and some of the other stuff comes in, like my 70 rule when it comes to trying to put a date on that breeding timing.
Yep.
There's things you can do without the buck data. There's ways to date a thicket without a single buck picture. I can tell you exactly when you'll get your buck pictures. And I mean, I've done this in my shop countless times with buddies.
Right.
I haven't lost my $20 bill yet. And I do it always with fawning data,
Right.
know,
The
either
importance.
in the moment or previous.
Yep. The importance of actually getting that fawn data has been, I think, a instrumental piece into the success that myself, my dad, my buddies, over the last couple of years. And that's obviously you're leaving your camera out all year long, or it's being able to get out there, like you said, of trying to figuring out the size of the tracks and figuring out, the 70 rule where, if that track is, 70% bigger or, just smaller from the mother fawn or doe, you're being like, okay, that deer was born in May, right? And that has been critical thinking, because what's funny is how you're saying about finding that daylight sign and day walkers. Strategically the last 2 years, certain spots where I've placed cameras, I've gotten a lot more daytime action. I've gotten like ran on video mode and seeing chasing, and it's October 18th. Now it's not maybe the big mature buck that we maybe want to get after. Might be a younger buck, anything along those lines. But it's to be able to piece things together and see that for the future.
Years. Yeah, so I've been pushing historical data and fawning specifically since the early 2000s. This will be my ninth season really drilling in on the fawning data, and it's allowed me to develop some pretty cool tricks and how to figure all that out. Um, yeah, so it's funny because I started on my mission 3 years ago, and I listened to 2,200 podcasts, and I could not find a single person talking about historical data or fawning or anything, and so that's kind of what led me to just beating on the drum for so long. And so, but yeah, so back to that data. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you guys are using
Yep.
that information to try to dial in. And when you're hunting small parcels, it's critical. If I tell you, hey man, you can come hunt my 10 acres. There's just a few deer, does that live on there. They have fawns every year, so surely they're getting knocked up. There's bucks. Come on and hunt. Well, your biggest thing is going to be like, well, when? I mean, you're in the South. I mean, if I'm in the Adirondacks, you're going to be like, all right, bro, I'll be there in November, like,
Yeah.
but if it's Georgia, you're going to be like, all right, well, it's July. How big are your fawns? Do they still have spots? Well, they're 10 pounds. Like, okay, I'll be there around Christmas, like you got to try to like because, I have fawns that are born in March and April, and I have fawns that are born right now in August. And so you certainly would not want to be bow hunting your big buck over a doe that has a 10-pound fawn.
Right.
Um, and so I think that's ever more critical the further south you go. I think there's a common disbelief that the rut all happens in one window. And if only over the course of several years, if only I have proven to the world one thing, only is that is a lie. That is all I ever wanted to accomplish, was that the rut does not happen because when I moved to the South and I started figuring all this out, man, it was like it was it was crazy because I was used to rifle hunting in the North where we had a rut, and I came to the South and I'd hunt in November and I wouldn't see anything, and it was horrible. But one thing I'll say right now is just to kind of give guys a little bit of a glimpse of my 70 rule, and some tricks you can use.
Yep.
Right now is August, and it's a perfect time to do this. So there's really a couple things you can do. Let's say you're on a new piece, and you don't have any buck pictures. You never ran a camera there before. Maybe Karen doesn't like cameras, and she says you can hunt as long as you don't use cameras, right? Like, so you're like, all right, well, all right. So here's something you can do. You can, right now is August, between August and September 1st. You can go out and you can glass. and you can glass up those fawns. And my 70 rule applies visually to fawns, meaning the fawns that were born before June in March and April and May, right now by 9/1, they will start losing their spots. You will visibly see that the earliest fawns, those April fawns, 70% of their spots will be gone. And that's how that kind of makes my 70 rule that I came up with. 70% of those spots will be visibly gone. So let's say you're out in Kansas right now, travel hunting, and you're glassing and you see some fawns. You can actually, with your glass around this any time of year, but this time of year, what you're looking for is for those older fawns that are losing their spots or not. I mean, it just depends on when you're going to hunt. So, what do you do with that data? Well, if you're trying to hunt if you're trying to hunt early September, early October, pre-rut, then you're probably going to be really trying to key in on the places that have those 70-pound fawns right now. So the other part of my 70 rule isn't just the 70%. 70% of those spots will be gone. Well, those doe fawns that have 70% of their fawns gone, they're going to weigh about 70 pounds. And so, right about now, if you're going to hunt the September, October timeframe, the pre-rut, you're going to want to focus on those places that have giant fawns. You're going to want to focus on hunting near those does that were impregnated in September. If you figure out the gestation period and how long does carry for, then basically, that a March 26th fawn was probably inseminated the last week of September, and that's when you need to hunt there. That's not a spot to hunt Thanksgiving. That doe's pregnant. She's not. That's not. And when you hang your cameras there, if Karen lets you, your big buck pictures always line up with this. Always. 100%. So like let's flip that on the reverse. So let's say right now you're glassing out there at Karen's and you're seeing little 10, 15-pound fawns that are only a couple weeks old right now in August, middle of August. They're not 70 pounds. They haven't lost 70% of their spots. They have all their spots. They're probably 30, 40 pounds. Well, for a fact that those does were impregnated later. There's things that I teach that you can further dial in on that, really hone it in close. But for a fact that's not a September 25th thicket,
Right.
because her little fawn's only going to be 20, 30 pounds that time of year. She was obviously probably a Christmas bred deer. That date, that estrus, or the gestation period would more line up with like a Christmas insemination, and maybe you would want to hunt that thicket around that time. So, being able to glass up your fawns is important. You can use my 70 rule visually. You can also, it applies on their body weight. Those 70-pound fawns will estrus themselves late season, so that provides a late season opportunity. So let's say you find one of those does out there glassing, you find her, she's got huge fawns. Okay, well, you know where you want to bow hunt. You want to bow hunt over her early because she's hot early. B, you also want to come back late and hunt there the last week of season because her fawn is 70 pounds or more, which means she herself is going to estrus. So now that deer has provided you with two opportunities, early and late, which you didn't have before. Real opportunities, early and late, and you didn't have that before. All off glassing one giant fawn in August. You got an early and a late opportunity right there. And so, you can really deduce a lot of data with that. And then the other way to tell is, let's say you can't glass at Karen's. The other way to tell is simply with a tape measure. I always have one in my shirt pocket, just like a seamstress tape I always carry. And you can mathematically tell. So the third leg of everything my 70 rule is based off, the third leg is track size. And one thing that I have found is no matter where you live, it applies pretty much everywhere, that when a fawn has around this time frame again, August to September 1st, a fawn that was born early before that May-June mark who has now losing 70% of her spots. She's also in that 70-pound range. One thing you're going to find too is that her hoof is now 70% the size of her mother's. So if her mother has a 2-inch wide track, let's say you're in Wisconsin, mom has an 8-inch wide track. No, I'm just kidding, because my buddy always sends these giant deer tracks. I'm like, Jesus Christ. He's like, that's Minnesota doe. I'm like, a doe in
Jeez.
Minnesota. But if mom has a 2-inch track, that fawn, if it's the kind of fawn we're talking about, she's gonna have an inch and a half, 1.6. So you put the tape on there, and if you see, okay, mom's 2 inches, you put the tape on there and it's an inch. That's a 40-pound fawn. You know what I mean? It's a little tiny inch track. So the track is the second one. So 70% the size of the track of her mom's. Uh, 70 pounds on the hoof. 70% of her spots gone. That's a double opportunity. That's a
Right.
double opportunity. That's early bow, late rifle, on the same scrape potentially. So what I would say, if you find that situation, almost always that's when you'll get your big buck pictures. You'll get your big buck pictures slipping through 925, 10-1, 10-5. It'll be a ghost town, 12-20, 12-15. They'll start slipping through again, looking for that doe fawn. It always lines up. And so I've proven it time and time again, enough to now where I'm free talking about it and I don't feel like I can be a fool.
Yeah.
I've actually documented this enough now. I feel safe.
Yeah, no doubt about
There was a
that.
curve where I was like, oh, if I say something, they'll attack me. No, now I've seen this enough. Like, it happens. Like,
Yeah.
your big buck pictures line up with those fawns always.
Yeah.
Always. They know when they're there.
Yeah. So to be even build upon that, so obviously we just got done wrapping up about talking about the fawns. Let's talk about those scrapes, man. Just because I'm sure that's the other kind of ingredient to your recipe with these day walkers are the scrapes. So I guess just like to continue to build upon that, just some of your unorthodox tactics, the things that you're doing that I think could really apply to all across the country in some form or fashion. I guess talk about some of those key things when it comes to your.
Yeah. So, again, I would say to people to think about this from the perspective that all of a sudden you woke up and there's 100 cameras on your kitchen counter and there's 10 buck tags. What are you going to do with them? And so, exactly. So in order to do, what you're going to do on day one, pretty much, is you're going to put them out in the woods and you're going to start making rules for yourself. How can you best use these cameras? And I have to admit, like right out of the gates, and I know it hurts a lot of people's feelings, but I don't give a shit about night bucks and summer bucks. Now I will try to find, so let me pause that thought, because I will try to find a summer buck or two to hunt in September. Because I've always killed a mature buck in early October. I've done it like 12 years in a row. Well, I wanted to start killing one in September. And I started doing that. But in order, you're hunting two different animals. And so while I'm always hunting October bucks in those historical breeding spots, when you're hunting a September or late August buck, you actually are hunting them in their summer spot. So I'm diversifying my game slightly to pick up that, try to pick up that September summer buck, but um, uh, uh, sorry to get sidetracked there. But so as far as what I'm focusing on, it would hurt people's feelings to hear, but take those 100 cameras, throw them in the woods, take all your pictures, and anything that's at night or during the summer,
Get rid
I
of them.
put it in this folder over here. And if it's after 9-1 and it's a daytime buck picture, it goes on a spreadsheet and it goes in a different folder. And so what I have found is if you have enough tags and enough cameras, you really, 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 really only need to focus on those daytime deer. You're just going to waste. And come on, like, okay, like, just not to be stupid, but from a common sense standpoint, like, have you ever, like, I know you have, but I'm asking people that are listening, like, have you ever ran 5 cameras or 10 cameras, how much work it is? Like, I run 119 cameras, and I've ran over 80 for like 12 years. So it is a lot of work to get to some of these cameras. I have to paddle in. A lot of them require chest waders. We have gators, like, there's hogs, there's tons of snakes here. So, like, it is an adventure every time I go to a camera, let alone 100 of them plus. So it's imperative that my efforts are used most wisely, and that is going to be focusing on daytime deer, since that's when I hunt, and focusing on that needle in a haystack, which is a daytime walking mature buck. Because if you can focus 100 cameras on that effort, and out of those 100 and whatever cameras, if you can find 10 or 15, you can ensure every year you kill a couple. And that's why every year I'm like, yeah, I'll kill one or two good bucks. They won't be booners because I live here, but I'll kill a couple. Just because I know, like this year, I'm expecting 10 or 12 to show up at a certain time that have showed up previous years. So let me build on that a little bit. So, okay, so now you got your cameras out. You've thrown away 98% of your pictures because they were someone else's night bucks. You're like, oh, I got a hammer at midnight. Oh, never mind. Throw that picture away. So now you've thrown away 98% of your pictures and you're only focusing on day walking mature bucks. Well, that's still not good enough. That's still not good enough if you have 10 tags, because you're still not going to fill those 10 tags that efficiently. So, what are you, so just stop right there. So like, okay, so you've thrown away 90% of that data. You have, let's say you have 5 day walking mature bucks. And you what are you going to do with that data? Like, you don't know. Are you have cell cameras? Are you going to try to hunt them here and now? Because if that buck was there 2 days ago, one of my sayings is, if you're hunting hot sign, you're a day behind. If that buck was there 2 days ago on your scrape camera, it's too late. Like, you could try to rush out there and maybe he's still there, but that's not how you fill 10 tags fast. So I further that one up. I want daytime deer and I want day walking mature bucks, but I want them to show up at a certain thicket more than 1 year. So when I have a mature buck that shows up 2 or 3 years in a row, he becomes more of a sure bet. And while nothing is a sure bet, I have gotten this thing that I do dialed in to where I'm probably having encounters more than 50% of the time when I sit with my target animal. And that's why I've killed so many deer on the first sit. I mean, I killed last year on the first sit. I killed the year before on my first sit of the year. It's not always that way, and this year I probably won't. Just statistically, it's going to be impossible to keep that up, right? Like numerically, but so I won't kill this year on the first sit. It's not really, it's becoming impossible numerically, but I'll have those encounters, and I'll have good encounters, and I'll have them more than 50% of the time. I mean, if I'm in the woods twice and don't have an encounter with my target animal, then that's a really, really big problem for me, because generally speaking, I know where these deer, when they're coming, and they're not always alive. They're not always alive, but I do run some cell cameras. I do have usually one scrape with a cell camera at on a woodlot, so I can get some real time data. But usually, I'm camped out at a spot, and it's within the first 3 days, I'm seeing my animal. I mean, it's pretty sure when a buck has come 3 times in a row. It's pretty sure, if he's alive, it's pretty sure.
So let's
You have to do it year over, because there's so few bucks that actually will do that.
right,
So you got to find the repeaters. You got to find
right,
the repeaters. So you got to focus on the daytime bucks only, and then you gotta focus on the ones that repeat that behavior to be the most efficient.
right,
There's no other way. There's no other way to be efficient than to focus on the bucks that repeat that behavior.
right. Are you
And
using any?
so I let a lot of big deer go because they don't repeat that behavior. They show up this year, I don't get them again, I let them go. And I have given up on booners
Yeah.
in a state with only 35 because they didn't repeat that behavior. And they have to. That's the most critical.
Mm-hmm.
To be efficient, you gotta hunt an animal that's going to repeat that behavior. And I know that's really weird to people, but
No, but it makes sense. So, like, let me ask you this: are you using any information with does regarding does with those scrapes? Just because, like, for me, man, that is especially like now. Like, if I get more fired up during the summer months, I could care less. Like we were just saying about bucks and all that type of stuff. But when I get does continuously, day after day after day after day, coming checking that that scrape or whatever, whether it's one that I found naturally or if it's one that I made. When I get that doe information, that's when those bucks start using that. So are you, even during that hunting season, are you using that like correlation of like, okay, it is October, whatever. I got these does continuously hitting that, and then boom, that day, the next day or that evening or whatever it be, those bucks are starting to come check that as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big question. We can dig in on that a little bit. What I do want to just say for people listening is when it comes to historical data, beware of anybody who says they really use historical data if they're doing things like, for example, using scent, which deer lure works. I can tell you right now, I've tested it. It works great. But if you're luring deer or you're baiting deer, it's not historical data. Or if you're getting nighttime pictures of deer, that's not historical data. Summer pictures is not. I mean, I guess that could be. I don't track summer deer. Okay, I don't know about them, but it could be, I guess. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about natural deer doing natural movements, hanging a vine like out of four corners, so that they naturally hit their head on it, and they will turn it into a scrape. Natural deer doing natural things, and that's what we mean by historical data, just for the people listening. And so capturing those data points where a doe eats at that oak tree or a buck crosses that creek, and capturing that and in its natural form, not when you poured out a tractor trailer load of corn and 50 deer came. Like that's not a repeatable endeavor. So
No.
that's, I mean, I guess it is if you keep pouring it, but that's, so just for the people. So for me, yeah, so it actually is all about the does for me, and it's all about the year round. So I guess for me, a scrape is like a window into a scrape is like a window into the social structure of your deer. And as long as you really, really, really respect your scrape area and you don't contaminate it. And I know in like out west, the guys, they bare hand them, and they're wearing sneakers and they got their black labs running around their legs. Maybe they're little kids with them, and they don't really care about contaminating their scrape areas. They still get the deer that use them. And I guess, like I said, it doesn't matter about scrapes or anything. If you're in one of those big buck states, just hunt a good spot in a good state, hunt a good spot in a good state, and you'll get it done. But if you're not in one of those locations, it's everything. You got to know what your deer are doing if you're going to really dial in on their timing. The likelihood that you're going to get a picture of a fawn being born is not high. You're most likely going to be trying to backdate 2 weeks a wobbly legged fawn, and it's going to be a guesstimation at your best. You're probably going to be not seeing standing estrus. You're going to be seeing other phases of the rut, like chasing and stuff like that. And so it's going to be really difficult for you to understand really timing on a granular level with just those types of pieces of information, unless, like I said, you saw standing estrus on camera, and maybe you want, because I say, in the name of science, I'm an engineer. I say, in the name of science, you always want to have at least two data points that confirm each other. So if you really do see like a fawn born and your big buck pictures line up with that, I think that's a pretty fair assumption on a piece of land. But for me, where I live, it's important for me to understand the doe structure, and the reason why it's important. And the reason why I like how that scrape is a window into the into the deer's social structure is because you can really deduce a lot of information if you take the time to learn, like, body language from deer. And so when you're trying to put these puzzle pieces together, it's really important when you see a doe, let's say you see a doe, I don't know, rub urinating. Well, there's a lot you can deduce from that. So is she rub urinating in the scrape or near the scrape? Because if she's rub urinating in the scrape, um, is she also tail cupping? Because she's probably within 24 hours of being estrus. She's horny. But if she's tail, if she's rub urinating next to the scrape and it's like once, then there's probably, I posted some pictures of this where moments later you see like a little buck, like a little crotch horn walk out. So they do that as a sign of nervousness. So maybe she did that once next to the scrape as a sign of nervousness. Maybe she's doing it a lot in conjunction with feces. And so she's trying to mark her territory because she's going to be leaving for a few days. And that's a real activity that I document. So I think having that window into their social structure so that you can really understand. So, okay, she's rub urinating because there's a little scrub buck nearby and she doesn't like him. And she's, or maybe she's marking her territory because she's going to leave for a few days and she doesn't want other does to move in. Now, those little pieces of information seem subtle and worthless, but they're not. So if you're talking about wanting to have a high odds sit where you're going to kill a buck on the first sit, possibly, then you really need to do the devil's in the details. And not all scrapes are created equal. You're not going to hear this anywhere else, but not all scrapes are created equal. Now, for example, I can get into some tricks I do about building priority at a scrape because historical data doesn't do you any good if you're not capturing that buck the first day he shows up at a woodlot. For example, if a buck is on your piece of land for 5 days, he shows up at your scrape on day 3. What are you going to hunt 2 days late, 3 days late next year? That's not very good historical data. And there's things you can do, tricks that I have found, where you can make sure that buck hits your scrape the first moments he's on your piece. That being said, not all scrapes are created equal. So um, it is ideal that you have a scrape location, and I have a checklist for my scrape locations for daytime deer only scrape location. If I say scrape, it means daytime. And it means it's a community scrape, so it's year round daytime scrape. And so but those still are not all created equal. So there's going to be some that are better than others, and I don't think a lot of people realize why that is. One thing I've found through all of my research and data collection is actually there is a reason, and I've proven this time and time again quite handily. And what it is when multiple doe groups use a scrape area, then that scrape area becomes 10 times more deadly. And so if you can get those daytime historical pictures of your day walking mature buck more than 1 year in a row at a scrape location that is shared by multiple doe groups, then you have a very, very high odds sit. In fact, those scrapes are preferenced like 50 to 1.
Right.
Um, with basically, you can almost 9 out of 10 times guarantee that when a big buck shows up, if the wind is in his favor and some of the other things he uses to get to scrapes, if those things are in his favor, or maybe he's in a bottom swirling, he doesn't care because he shows up in the middle of the night and he's going to hit it in the middle of the night. He doesn't care if it's in a parking lot, right? So 1 a.m., whatever, when he shows up, he's going to go and like 9 out of 10 times hit that scrape that's shared by more than one doe group. And so what is that? So, well, how the hell do you figure that out? Well, that's all part of what we're talking about with leaving your cameras out and finding that information. So it can be as simple as seeing 2 mature does fight in your scrape. We've all seen that.
Yep.
But that's not reliable enough information that you can just go out and mine. You can just go out and mine fawning data. And if you see mature does using your scrape, but let's say one has a pair of fawns that are 25 pounds and the other has a single fawn that's 70 pounds, you can rest assured that you have 2 different doe groups using that scrape. And while that may sound funny to someone who's on the Canada border, here in the South, it's a real thing. And I also would say that in urban areas, it's a real thing. When you, even up north, if you get into places like Chicago and stuff, your urban deer will have extremely bifurcated breeding dates in urban settings. So it can be really useful in those situations. But there's things that I teach that you can dial in and make sure that your scrape location isn't just a day location, and a year-round location, and it's not only just the best location on that piece, but you can also make sure that that location is being used by multiple deer to communicate. So you hear the term social hub, and I think the people that invented that word, the real legends out there, understand what it means. The guys like Pottinger and those guys, they've done this for a long time too. They know what that word means. But when I hear a young guy say the word social hub, it really makes me question if he knows what that means, because one doe group with fawns that all fawn within a week of each other, if that's all you see on that scrape, that's not really a social. I mean, I guess that's like my living room being a social hub for my family, but that's not like the 7-Eleven being a social hub for the town. And so there's varying degrees of scrapes. And so I think that through what I teach is that data collection, and to dial in and to make sure you're keying in on daytime primary bedding scrape locations that are serving multiple thickets. And boy, if you can time that with the pre-rut and get in there with a clean access, so that all sounds good. But the problem is when you find these locations, probably more than 50% of the time they're inaccessible. No, I'm gonna say like
70.
75% of
Yep.
the time they're not huntable. That's the problem. It's easy to go out and be like, oh, well, I could find this spot, and you find like an oxbow or like a peninsula, and it's tore up with rubs, and then you're like, oh, that's a 4 mile paddle in, no big deal, you know. It's like in the dark, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes though, like these spots aren't feasible. And that's the name of the game, you know. It's putting the boot miles on
Right.
to frickin' find that buck that's a needle in a haystack, then find that scrape that serves all these bedding areas, that services him, that's more
Mhm.
of a needle in a haystack, and then all just to find out it's a 4 mile paddle that you're not willing to do. So, you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not getting naked and fording a river. I mean, but sometimes that's what you have to do, you know? I mean, if
Right.
you want that buck, but
Yeah. If you want to be number
uh,
36, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, so that's pretty much, I mean, you know, that's pretty much my whole strategy. I mean, everything I said there, I drill down even further on. I mean, I have methods for drilling down on everything that I said further.
right.
But the 70 rule will get you really close with your fawning. If you just went out to Kansas right now and started glassing fawns, I promise you,
Yeah.
you will start getting an idea of, you know, of some different,
Right.
yeah, breeding dates and
So, so
yep.
to build on that, Brandon, so you have your 70 rule, you got your scrapes. What's one more
Yep.
attribute that you consider as a really good key to your success in this unorthodox?
I would say for me, my success is completely dependent on historical data.
Mm-hmm.
If, for example, I now have 4 2027 cameras hung, and I have over 60, no, maybe not, because I found like 6 in my truck, but I have over 50 2026 cameras hung, and it that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what camo I'm wearing, or it doesn't matter if I screw up on a buck. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I thought he was coming back to bedding at 4:30, so I went there at 4 and damn bumped him. You know, I was cutting it too close. You know, or something. Maybe you know, all of those things I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do a lot of it. I'm gonna miss a deer. I hopefully don't wound one. I'm certainly gonna bust some walking in. I'm lazy like everybody else. I mean, you know, I try to cut it close. Like if I see old man Earl's coming back every day at 4:10, 4:10, 4:10, what time am I gonna walk in? 3:50? Because I'm lazy. I'm not gonna go in at 2:50 and sleep in my tree. I mean, that's what you should do to kill that deer. But like, I'm gonna be lazy. I'm gonna try to sneak in there. A doe's gonna, you know, I'm gonna bump a doe that's gonna bump him, and then I'm gonna ruin my day. I do it. And then once a buck knows he's being hunted, generally I don't hunt him anymore. That ship is sailed. That's another big thing for me is that once I feel like that buck knows I'm hunting him, I abort. And so like to have options for that regard. But I would say the number one thing for me is going to be those daytime deer. The number two thing is just going to be hunting those historical data marks that I have, because without them, I'm hunting blind. And I'm fine with that in a good state. I know I can pick a good spot. I understand terrain and wind and thermals and food. And, I understand that primary food, people say primary food a lot, but primary for who? I understand primary for the does, not primary for the buck. And I know that I can get into a big wood setting and I can track deer. And I know bucks run pretty fairly straight lines when they're on the move, and I know they'll start to browse and stagger when they're about to bed, and I look for that browse damage, and I can get on deer. I mean, I know how to track. So that part doesn't bother me. What bothers me is having deer to hunt because of where I live. And if you were to hunt 10 farms here in my town, you just blindly you'd be hurting, because we went out like a week and a half ago with the spotlight and we shined my whole county and we didn't even find the 150-inch buck in any bean field. So um what are you going to do then? You're going to go, oh, I'm in this really good terrain feature. It's like, dude, there's no buck in that town. Like, so, I mean, like, this is the South. Like, we
Yeah,
have
dude.
30 Boone and Crockett entries all the time. Like, come on, man. Like, so being forced to hunt specific deer forces me to focus on historical data. So for me here, it's hunting on daytime deer, and then it's hunting this historical data. Um, you know, uh, I think I think in other states you could focus on really just hunting daytime deer and focus on those rut. Maybe those apps like Spartan Forge would help you to figure out the rut. But I don't like to trust those. I like to hang my cameras. One thing I found is, I mean, literally, we were just up in where the hell were we? Jersey. And but anyway, so there was I saw a pregnant doe this past week. I travel a lot for work. I forget where I am, but I saw a pregnant doe in northern New England this past week, and it's August.
Yep.
And I mean, I have a trained eye, like I could tell a pregnant doe, and so this doe was pregnant. And here it is, Jersey, Northeast, August, pregnant doe. And you know how many people would call you a liar? And while I do think those apps are good, I would be very hesitant to trust like my hunting app that told me that a pregnant doe in August is impossible because I saw one.
Right.
So
Right.
I think you need to do your work no matter where you live. I think you need to collect that data. You need to go out in the spring. I do move my cameras from, my historical breeding data areas is not my fawning intel areas. I think that's important. You're focusing on really two different areas. When you're focusing on trying to gather fawning data, you really need to key in on broadleaf food below the belt buckle, really below the knee. They're very short, fawns are, and they start to browse in as early as a week or two. I'll move. Most of my historical breeding areas are like cattail marshes that are just beat to mud and there's rubs everywhere, or they're um, old oak flats that have rubs everywhere and like thick stuff that's all rubbed, but they're just ghost towns. And that's not where I get fawning pictures. I mean, you've got to move your cameras into those greenbrier, broadleaf, really, really low growing. Maybe find a creek where some flooding created some diversity. I get a lot of fawning pictures along creeks where, like, on a sharp bend where maybe the flooding flattened 10 acres, knocked over some trees and stuff. I'll get some fawning in there. But yeah, you've got to have broadleaf food below the knee to get those fawning pictures. And unfortunately, your historical breeding spots, like your cattail marshes and stuff, those don't have any of that.
Yeah.
So they're like a fawn ghost town.
So let me ask you this one. You do all this too, man, and you do it all out of to be more efficient. I mean, that's the one thing you said, I got 10 sits and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that's the name of the game with this whole process.
Yeah, so I didn't really realize that. You know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
so full disclosure, I didn't really until 3 years ago when I the first person I ever talked to was a podcast guy, Clint, and he was the first podcast I ever listened to. And I came out like 3 years ago and started kind of I told you I listened to 2,200 podcasts, and I could not find anybody talking about the way I deer hunt, historical data. Nobody was using it. Nobody even knew what the word meant. Talking about fawning dates and even like, it was just a very Greek thing. But yeah, it's I don't know the term, but it's been it's been interesting, man.
I like it.
Yeah.
What to kind of one more question to kind of wrap it up. What's something that you kind of want someone to really put forth the effort into doing, whether they do it or not already? Like, what do you want someone to be like, yo, listen, get out there, set your camera in his location and get that data for 2026. Do you know what I'm saying? Like what's something that a takeaway that you kind of want to give the audience?
Yeah, so I would suggest that people get off cell cameras, not to be stupid, but um, cell cameras did a lot of damage for my deer killing game. I was r- probably the single biggest thing I did for increasing efficiency was getting off cell cameras. I still use a few. I still will throw a reactionary hunt out there if a slob shows up at a scrape, like everybody else. I love this. I can't help it. I love that. I get up, take a leak, maybe 4 in the morning, and there's like a 160 at a scrape. And it's like, oh Lord, you rush out without even showering. So, yeah, no, I love it. I'll run a few cell cameras, but out of my 100 and something, I only have 11 now. So, I would say to get away from that cell camera game. Focus on get some cheap SD cameras and get a bunch of them. And from there, really focus on those daytime bedding areas. You want to find signs of daytime deer. Um, well, what does that look like? Well, daytime deer aren't eating acorns for the most part, or soybeans for the most part. I mean, around here, if you ride around, you'll see deer out there during the day. But for the most part, deer are browsing during the day. And so you really, really need to focus on finding browse damage. I have a lot of videos on that. And once you train your eye to pick out browse damage, oh my God, like when I'm walking now, I'm literally walking, I'm like, greenbrier chewed off, there's a mushroom with a bite out of it, there's something over there.
Yep.
You can see the where the clover's all been bit off at the stalk. And it's like now, like with the trained eye, I'm walking and I'm like, okay, like browse damage, browse damage, browse damage. And I'll actually follow those browse lines into their daytime bedding area. And so, what I would say is focus your cheap SD cameras on those primary bedding areas. Once you get daytime deer on camera, now you have an objective. You have a place to hunt. You do not have a place to hunt until you have daytime deer on camera. You don't have a place to hunt. You're getting pictures of other people's deer. You don't have a place to hunt yet. So go out, find browse damage, find thickets, and when you find that browse damage, you're going to see that it's happening during the day because they're going to good shit at night. So you'll find that that browse damage is happening during the day, and then once you have those deer pictures, now you have a job to do. You have to um, go out and canvas the area now. You found a primary bedding area. So now you have to go out and canvas and try to find that historical breeding sign that services that primary bedding. So all primary bedding areas will have a breeding area like near in it adjacent somewhere. So you have to go out and you have to find those deer, that primary bedding areas, breeding area, and get that historical data with your cheap SD cameras and do that across a couple of seasons and just have fun with it. And so what you'll find is um, mostly what happens is it's not as common because the deer, we don't have the age structure we have out west. So it's not really common here where I pick up a 3-year-old and then he turns 4 and then he turns 5 and then he turns 6. I mean, this is North Carolina, like I said, where we don't really have booners. So that is something that happens more out west. But one thing I will say here that happens mostly when you deploy this tactic, you're going to find is if you're in a primary bedding area, you are away from other people. That's why it's a primary bedding area, number one. So don't booger it up with, your bullshit laying your bag on the ground and stuff. And you know what, I'm
Yeah,
serious.
no
Like,
doubt.
have a little respect for the thing you found that took so much work. Don't
Yep.
pour your Mountain Dew on the ground. Don't lay your bag on the ground. I mean, don't let the grass and shit rub down your body. I mean, you put all this work into finding an actual place to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Don't booger it up and ruin it. That's why it's there. So once you have that information, what you'll find that happens most of the time is you end up just growing deer. So you end up with, like, Frank the spike horn, who next year comes in and he's still limping, and now Frank's a 6 point. And then all of a sudden, Frank's a 3-year-old. He's only like 80 inches, but he's an 8 point. And then now all of a sudden you shoot Frank at 4 and he's limping, but he's Pope young. That happens mostly here, I would say. You don't, because when you get into primary bedding areas, you're getting away from people. So you have a higher likelihood that a lot of guys say, well, my deer get killed. My deer get killed. We got hunting pressure. Dude, we got dog packs here. We got hunting pressure. But if you're in these primary bedding areas, deer are pretty good at living too. And if you're in these primary bedding areas, you're away from people. That's the reason why they're primary bedding areas. And so the likelihood, when you focus in the right areas, the likelihood of seeing those animals over and over again is higher. And so now all of a sudden you're pretty confident you're going to see Frank, because he was there at 1, he was there at 2, he was there at 3. You're way in the hell in the back of a swamp, and nobody's ever been on your camera. And you know what? I'm not near a highway. I don't really see a coyote. I know Frank's coming back, and that's how you feel. And so you go in and you hunt that 4-year-old, and you ruin it. You have an encounter, but you don't stick him. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and then you stick the 5th one, and that's just how it is, man. It's just a numbers game, I used to be a salesman. It's like knocking on doors. I mean, you get a lot of rejections, but the 10th lady's like, I would love an alarm system, and you're like, all right, cool.
Yep.
We're in business. And that's how big bucks are, man. But I would say those are the two biggest things is, daytime deer, hunt at the right time. So the right spot and the right time, both.
Mm-hmm.
You want to hunt the right spot, primary bedding, and you want to hunt at the right time, historical data. And then from there, I mean, it's just having a lot of options.
Right.
Don't go all in on $2.
Right.
Because if you're like me, you're going to ruin both of them. I do, man.
Yeah,
so
it happens, man.
I've got $10 this year, and I'm going to guarantee you probably 9, really 9. And I'm going to ruin at least 7 of them. I guarantee it. I'll probably get 2 on camera where I'm like, oh, there he goes.
Yep.
Big white tail.
Yep.
And I'll move to the next deer because I have a regimented. I know I'm hunting this 8 point during this week at this woodlot, and I'm navigating 40 miles to go hunt Old Man Earl for 7 days because he daylighted there repeatedly. And then I'm going to hunt another buck that daylighted 3 years in a row, a different 8-pointer. So I'm like, I have these regimented spots. So I'll strike out and I'll strike out and I'll strike out and I'll stick one. And I'll strike out and I'll strike out and I'll stick one. And that'll be my season, But if I don't have those options at bat, then it's a tough season. So I would tell people the third thing is set yourself up with a lot of deer. I mean, don't. I know it seems awesome the first time you find a day walking mature buck. You're like, he's dead. But the reality is 9 out of 10 times he's not dead.
Yeah.
If you're me, 9 out of 10 times he's not dead.
Yeah.
So
I get you, man.
That's what I would say. Find 10 of them and you're guaranteed to kill one. Then you can start telling your friends, I'm going to get one.
Yeah.
If you got 10 day walkers on repeat year over, you can brag a little.
Yeah.
But before that, really, you're just talking shit. It's not because you don't have anything, kind of like if you don't have daytime deer, you don't have a spot to hunt.
Right. Yep.
Unless you're in Ohio, and that's fine. You get at the base of a beaver dam and bucks cruise in those good states, but you don't want to do that in South Carolina. Like that'd be a tough week.
Yeah, real tough, man. No, dude, yeah. Brandon, I appreciate you, dude, coming on and chatting with me and sharing this wisdom. It was a really fun conversation. Where can people find you, follow along, watch your stuff over on YouTube and on obviously on any other social media outlet?
Dear God, please don't check out my YouTube. It's a train wreck. one day I will hopefully learn how to make videos, and I will usher everyone there. But in the meantime, Instagram or Facebook. Instagram's the best place to find me. Whitetail 101 for deer things, and 690 fishing for fishing things. Man, we catch some huge fish. I've gotten on some monster catfish this year, over 50 pounds, and
Dang.
we just got into jigging some Lakers last week, and so if you like fishing, you should check out 690 Fishing. But otherwise, yeah, stay tuned, man. Some big things coming for Whitetail 101. We're hoping to launch an app early next year, and actually, I've got a few things cooking this year, and I'm on some big deer, so
Love to hear
I'm
that.
hoping by the middle of October, man, I'm texting you a gripping grin.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. No, dude, good luck with all that, and I'm pumped for you, and I'm excited to see what is coming down the pipe with you for Whitetail 101. Well, thanks again, everybody.
Likewise.
Check out Brandon, everything that he has going on, the fishing and the whitetail stuff. We'll see you next week. Antler up.